acho que é a primeira vez que a Melissa vai falar para um público brasileiro, América Latina. A Melissa, para quem não conhece, ela é Associate Partner lá na IBM. Então, além de trabalhar há muito tempo com Procurement, Supply Chain, ela é considerada Top Voices, aí, 100 de mulheres em Supply Chain também. Então, ela produz bastante conteúdo, faz bastante palestra, tem muito material sobre assuntos legais, principalmente ligado à parte de tecnologia, dados, arquitetura. E hoje ela resolveu trazer aqui um bate-papo bem legal sobre a arquitetura híbrida de procurement, esse conceito de hybrid architecture de procurement, que é uma coisa aí, uma discussão, um debate bem atual, né, que a gente tem sobre como é que a gente coordena todo esse ecossistema de tecnologias e softwares. Então, sem mais delongas, eu já vou ver se ela já consegue entrar aqui para dar um alô para a gente. Melissa, can you hear us?
Got it. Thank you. Welcome. Data intelligence is more than having the right data at the right time. It's about having data at a point in time the most impactful to the decisions made in the organization. We have always been trying to achieve this with no real success. Over the last 40 years, we have evolved from spreadsheets to ERPs to procurement applications. We have transformed, and then we've digitally transformed. We are using AI technologies, and we want to start using quantum technologies. But still, we are trying to figure out how to view data at a point in time where it has the most impact on the decisions that we make in the organization. Your organization may have already started an enterprise transformation project, or perhaps you're planning to do that next year. But real transformation is about setting up your organization for success. And this means having to make minor adjustments against future transformations, not transforming 2, 3, 4 times. In our world today, there is no more room for multiple 3-year comprehensive transformations. It's no longer sustainable if we want to remain relevant. And it all starts with the architecture, the foundation. Let's focus on this timeline. It highlights the evolution of the procurement architecture landscape starting from 2007. This is because 2007 is when we really started to see some change. In 2007, there was a reduction of cost of cloud technologies that allowed for a rise in competition in procurement application providers. And through a series of acquisitions, the Enterprise Application Suite was born. The term Enterprise Application Suite, or Enterprise Suite, for today's conversation is a group of modules that support multiple functions: supplier management, sourcing, contracts, buying, compliance, risk, performance, invoice. These modules have a shared data architecture, and they sit on a unified platform. But we recognize that enterprise applications had some limitations. And in 2014, new companies emerged into the marketplace. These application providers focused on single modules, supporting one procurement function, like sourcing, or just contracts. The difference? Those enterprise suites split their focus, split their research dollars across the entire suite, and it gave them the breadth of capabilities. The single module, suppliers supporting just one procurement function, they had the depth of the capabilities. As we move towards 2016, startups were slowly becoming to be more visible, but not yet considered truly competitive. It wasn't until 2019 when the priority shifted and small businesses and startups were viewed as a necessity. This was also supported by the change in where investors were spending their dollars. For example, in 2019, SoftBank invested $100 million in a company called Globability. In 2022, APIs, although they had been around, became more mainstream, standardized. Organizations were able to now combine the best of both worlds, the breadth of the enterprise suite, but with the depth of the individual applications. And we'll talk more as we move through the hybrid ecosystem and where we see that hybrid ecosystem next year. But the one thing to highlight, between 2007 and 2024, we're moving through this journey more quickly. What once took us 7 years to adjust, we're now seeing those adjustments in less than 3 and 2 years. In fact, it was only in the past 5 years that AI technologies have become more accessible, allowing organizations to finally take advantage of their data and understand just how powerful that data can become. Leveraging these technologies in third-party applications and services, organizations could become more competitive and remain relevant to the constant changes we're experiencing globally. As we've seen recently, these changes range fluctuations in consumer demand, supply chain disruptions, natural disasters, and technology advancements such as AI and quantum. Suppliers were leveraging multiple AI technologies to strengthen their products and services. But as more and more startups, small, medium-sized businesses leverage these AI technologies, it created a huge influx of suppliers in the marketplace. For example, where we once saw a handful of enterprise applications, which would be the center of this spider map, we now see hundreds of supplier applications, often positioned in a niche part of the market where they're solving for very specific business challenges. Earlier this year, I spoke in Israel at the International Startup Convention. In the exhibit hall were over 5,000 small, medium-sized, and startup companies. Each one of these companies your organizations could potentially be working with. The spider map is published to reflect the latest in the modern procurement stack. Each version of this spider map is larger than the previous one. For example, if you look at the risk box, risk suppliers now have their own box. And it seems that each risk supplier is focusing on a specific area. For example, financial risk, fraud prevention, risk sensing, cyber risk. And the categorization of suppliers has become narrow. It's becoming more fragmented. For example, when looking more closely, you see suppliers that support commodity insights and commodity indices. I see suppliers for curated data and data aggregator. And for all this wonderful growth and competition, there's two major issues. Organizations are now working with more new suppliers than ever before. And the enterprise application suites are no longer going to solve for every business challenge that pops up. As a result, those large enterprise application providers started to change their business model. They continued to develop capabilities that supported 80% of their customers, but it was no longer viable to develop a one-off solution to support their customers' business challenges. They pushed the development to application partners and relied heavily on third-party niche suppliers. This created that hybrid architecture, combining the best of enterprise suites with the breadth and capabilities, but with the niche suppliers who had the depth of capabilities. In turn, the use of the API connects the enterprise suites to those niche suppliers for data exchange and sharing. And these niche suppliers could solve for very specific issues and challenges and push those solutions back into the enterprise application. This was really exciting. We now have more access to data, more applications, and we can start solving a lot of the things that we couldn't do before. But this challenge in the business model pushed the responsibility onto the organization. The organization was now forced to take the lead or act as that general contractor. They no longer had the luxury of sending the request to an enterprise application provider and asking for them to solve it. In 2023, a pattern started to emerge, and I could see the downside of the hybrid solution starting to show, and it was becoming very crowded. Going forward, we're going to focus on just one use case scenario: suppliers. Each API now connects to a new supplier to evaluate risk, a new supplier for ESG, and a new supplier to validate bank information and certifications. And the list can go on and on and on. Additionally, limitations in the connectivity between the enterprise application wasn't bringing back all of the available data to the database that they were linked to. For example, if an organization linked to an ESG supplier that stored 25 fields related to ESG, the enterprise application providers were only bringing back a subset, 15 of those fields. If the end user wanted to see the other bit of data, the other 10 fields, they'd have to log on to the supplier ESG portal to view them. Each time the organization wanted to solve for a specific challenge, they'd use this API connect to a new supplier. On the organization side, this created a new supplier record, a new contract, and another supplier to manage. More APIs meant more IT support. And in the example, there was no guarantee that you were going to receive all the available data. The organization just wasn't prepared to support this unprecedented influx of suppliers. The current supplier registration and onboarding and review process was not and is not designed to be flexible enough to adjust as it needed to be. So how do we think about this? How do we solve for this? Because if we continue to do what we're doing today, we're going back to that spider map. We're going back to the spider map, and we're going to want to start connecting to hundreds of different suppliers. So we want to stop that. The organization cannot link to every supplier every time it wants to collect information or solve a business challenge. And as we've seen globally, talent shortages are increasing in procurement and supply chain departments. And with the high impact of change, this is not going to be a sustainable solution. And that kind of has to stop. So instead of connecting to multiple suppliers, we want to shift to a centralized supplier portal that can funnel supplier-related capabilities into a single point of entry. This automates and streamlines the supplier interactions. It leads to fewer contracts and fewer suppliers to manage. And it frees up organizational resources to focus on value-added activities, such as fostering strategic partnerships and supplier relationships. From the organization's perspective, this approach provides consistency in those supplier interactions. That consistency has shown to provide benefits in improvements of transparency in the supply chain and reducing supplier risk. The costs are reduced as they're spread across multiple suppliers and organizations. On the organization side, they're no longer acting as that general contractor, as this responsibility has shifted to the centralized supplier portal. End users have one place to work, and the approval flow is simplified because information about suppliers is consolidated into one area instead of hundreds of connections. This does reduce the overall end-to-end supplier cycle time. Suppliers, they know what to expect, and it shelters them from changes that occur inside the organization. When changes do occur, the impact is to the central supplier portal, not to the individual connections to 100 suppliers. Ultimately, the goal for any organization is to remain competitive within their industry, to stay relevant with the changes in consumer demand, to stay ahead of our constantly changing global supply chain. But this can only happen when automation is done the right way so that we can make a better informed decision. Circling back to the spider map, it's a really good vision of the modern procurement platform. But as we've seen, it's only expected to grow with not just hundreds of individual connections, but more like 1,000. So when automation is purposely thought about, then we can make those better informed decisions. And if you're not already thinking about this, unfortunately, you may already be falling behind. I'd like to open it up to conversation, questions. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Can you hear me now, Melissa, or no?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Now we're talking. First thing, I don't know, is we can't see you, your camera is on. People wanted to be able to see, is your camera on or is that a problem? Of me? I don't know, I don't think it's on. Oh, yeah,
Hi.
Hello. So, sorry because we had some audio issues, so you weren't hearing us. That's like awesome provocation. We're going to put on the screen an app for people to be able to send questions. Guys, you can send in Portuguese. We translate here, so no problem. We don't have to have it in English for Melissa. And I'll just start. I'll just start with one, Melissa. I think we discussed this a little bit, but and you, I think you can also close your sharing of your screen so we can see you bigger. Yeah, great.
Well, I really like my generative AI picture much better.
So, talking about AI, I heard you speaking a lot about this on other podcasts. So, if you could also talk a little bit more about what you actually think is the real impact of AI within procurement, is if it is something like new and that's very speedy, that's going to change everything like tomorrow, or if it's this hype, is something people are just overreacting and we should look it through some different angles. So it would be nice to have your take on that.
Yeah. AI has been around for a long time. The earlier aspects of AI was used in diagnostic imaging here in the United States. We called them software as a medical device. So for example, if you have an Apple Watch, as soon as the Apple Watch started monitoring your health in the United States, it's considered a medical device. So AI isn't just about making things faster. We see that with Tesla. Tesla has a form of AI, computer vision. But when we look at the large range of what is an autonomous AI, it's a 5-scale map, and Tesla is only on number 2. So in the industry, we still haven't gotten to a fully automated, non-human, non-interaction type of application. Right now, I focus on where AI is supplementing the human brain. If you think about it, every day we generate 140 zettabytes of data. That's over 328 million terabytes of data. That's a lot of data. And as a human, our brains are not yet at the capacity to be able to absorb that, find patterns, understand the context, and be able to create an action. Without AI technologies, we would still be where we were about 8 years ago, making decisions with the information we had and recognizing that the decision may or may not be right. Our level of confidence in making that decision may be low, but that's what we had grown to accept. It became the norm. Technology changed about 5 years ago. IBM created a new chip. This chip allowed for faster processing, which then exploded the AI revolution. This is why the spider map from Dr. Eloise Epstein has grown significantly every time she shares it. More and more companies, not just the IBMs, not just the Accentures, not just the Intels, but more companies now have accessible to what we shared before: machine language, deep learning, natural language processing, neural networks, robotics, process automation, and computer vision. All of these technologies are now integrated into applications for things like automated recycling, or being able to, your Amazon, let's go back to something we do every day, Netflix and Amazon. All those recommendations is because of AI. Your Starbucks app, I love Starbucks. Your Starbucks app uses over 400,000 variables just to give you a personalized, hyper-personalized recommendation. We couldn't do that without AI. And so you take that and pull it back into procurement and supply chain, and it's this type of technology that's allowed us to pull this data together, large quantities of data, being able to scrape the internet very quickly, process it at speeds that are milliseconds, so that we can make better informed decisions about our supply chain, predict how that supplier is going to adjust to the natural disaster that just occurred a day ago. If there's a tsunami, we can use AI within our weather predictive analytics, pull that into our supplier applications, and be able to quickly adjust. So what we hope is that working with suppliers in the future, we'll have more agility, more flexibility to recognize that that supplier is going to have a problem, not waiting for that supplier to tell us that they have a problem. I'm very passionate about this topic.
Great. We have a couple questions here on the app, and also I think we're going to get some live from the audience. So anybody that wants to ask directly, Melissa, can just call me with your hand, and then I will give the microphone. I'll just start with the questions that I have here. I'll start with the first one, to be fair. Melissa, in Brazil, we're still very early on the ESG evaluation of suppliers. How do you consider the rest of the planet, or maybe in your context, your guys are currently dealing with that within procurement and supply chain as a topic?
Let me start by saying my views and opinions are my own and do not represent that of my current employer. I see organizations going after the shiny object. This year it's ESG, last year it was supplier diversity, and the year before that it was something else. Tomorrow and next year it'll be something else. ESG is important, but it didn't start in procurement and supply chain. ESG actually started early on in investors wanting to recognize where they invested their money, what kind of company was supporting that type of ESG component. So where we are today, at least in the United States and some areas of the world, ESG is gaining relevance, and we're trying to quickly adapt our systems to pull that data in. But we also have to recognize that perhaps next year the focus of leadership may be somewhere else. And I say this because the systems or the architecture that we have in place around suppliers isn't agile enough to continue to change focus so quickly. I mentioned earlier that one of the goals of the organization is to adapt to the changes in consumer demand. In the US, consumer demand is really focused on ESG right now. In Asia Pacific, they're focused on something else. So creating this hybrid architecture, but with some purpose behind it, will allow for that fluctuation as our focus continues to change.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to jump into the next question. This is Giovanna from Baker Hughes. I have a question concerning your presentation, and thanks for that. It was very informative, and my mind is kind of exploding. I think for, like, at least from my perspective, all the tools and systems and platforms that we had, they started with the idea and that they would deliver something centralized. So I think that was the speech from the start. And what we saw was what you showed in your presentation. We have like a lot of different systems, and now we are struggling with that. Something in the beginning was to facilitate, and now this is a challenge that we face. And my question is, what do you think actually if this idea of centralizing it could generate a new problem? For example, this system starts as being a centralizer, but we start to find new gaps and new things that they don't have yet, and maybe open the market for new tools to start spreading again. You know, like my idea, my concern is, can we jump into a new cycle of decentralization? What do you think about it?
It's a very philosophical question. We should have coffee.
I would love that.
Maybe next time you need to come to Brazil, Melissa.
Yes, we should do that.
Brazilian coffee is very good.
God, that's a great question. I do see some concerns. A centralized supplier portal, because for right now we'll focus on suppliers as our use case, is going to solve, it may not appear right now that it's solving a lot of problems, but it will solve a lot of problems. As an organization, you know, when I sit on the organizational side, every time I have to maintain a supplier, it costs money. Every time I have to link to an API, it costs money. But I also recognize that you're going to see the Aribas and the Coupas and the iValuas and the Jaggards, you know, and the Determines and some of the other companies that are outside of within region. They also have their own supplier portals. They're going to continue to try to push their supplier portals. Suppliers will still be asked to try to join their supplier portals and a centralized supplier portal. It's not going to be rainbows and clouds, you know, at first. There will be some bumps along the road. And that's going to happen because these companies have had that market share within suppliers for so long that sometimes adjustments aren't going to be easy. Where this should go for the future, to answer your question, the centralized supplier portal should eventually evolve into a universal supplier portal that works connectively or easily, instead of trying to compete with Ariba's portal or Coupa's portal, works seamlessly so that suppliers still don't feel like they're trying to integrate into multiple sides. Now, the centralized supplier portal that we talked about is going to solve a lot of those issues, but I still see those enterprise applications pushing back.
Great.
And that's just being honest.
We have, I will just choose the more voted question here, Melissa, and that was, how can we protect company data in this new proposed model? I think in terms of security or, I don't know, GDPR, but yeah.
You guys ask really good questions. I don't know, the US folks don't ask really.
There's tons of them here, so I can keep coming.
Yeah, I should come next year and just hang out and we just talk all day. So part of my job is exactly what you've just talked about. Understanding the privacy of data, the ethics of data, how data is being handled. As a corporate citizen, you know, within my corporate world, organizations are focused on evolving the data culture, creating a data literate corporate citizen. But we also have to recognize that all of us as individuals, we're also global citizens. So for example, terms and conditions have changed. We see more applications using AI, but now the terms and conditions are saying that they're going to use your data. That once you add your data into the internet, if that application is scraping your data, then that data can be used to support the testing. There's no guarantee that that company has removed all of your personal information. But on the other hand, we see companies like, and I'm going to use Lensa. Lensa is a generative AI app, which is how I got my photo. I put in 10, 12 photos of myself. It creates new it's cheaper for me to do that than to go and get a photographer. It creates a whole bunch of new generative AI headshots, and that's what I use because I think it looks better. But when you read the terms and conditions of that app, as soon as my headshots are created, it deletes my data. There has to be at some point trust within the use of these applications. And at the moment, that trust is not there. In order for that trust to succeed, we have to have the fact sheet. Suppliers have to provide information about how they're collecting the data. Are they providing the necessary coverage to ensure the data bias or the social bias is not there? Is there assumptions that are being made when it's testing the data? How are they accounting for the privacy in the data that they're collecting? There's a much larger conversation that we could talk about just on the 5 pillars of trust, but I think we're going to have to save that for coffee.
We have more here. If anyone wants to ask directly, just show your hand, then Pedro can give you the mic. But we have more. And this one goes like, how far do we think we are from this proposed model? Or when do you estimate we will be capable to reach such model, such architecture?
When I put up my slide, I specifically and purposely put 2024. I mentioned that because right now, we're just experiencing the limitations with the hybrid architecture. It depends on how quickly people recognize what's happening and how quickly that they're willing to adjust and change. It also means that we need suppliers who are developing the solutions to allow us as the organizations to change to that hybrid model, but with purpose. There are some out in the market. I think the larger challenge is that it's not getting to that architecture. It's sifting through the 5,000 suppliers and finding the one that can support it.
Great. I have the second most voted one here. So How do you see the relationship between AI and ESG, so in real life? What are the best practices that you have seen that have worked, or what you have seen that did not work in terms of mixing those two concepts together? So AI and ESG.
What has worked? When we think about ESG, environmental, governance, supplier, diversity, inclusion, et cetera, there's a whole host of like 19, 20 different things that comprise of ESG. That's a lot to handle. Where AI is really making this more value added is scraping the internet and finding media outlets and newspapers that tell us if a supplier that we're working with is in the newspaper because they got raided the night before and found that they were dumping chemicals down the drain. Or we still see today in some countries articles on the internet about companies using child labor. Now, in a lot of companies globally, those two things are completely against policy. It would impact the relationship that that organization has with that supplier. We couldn't have that information if we didn't have the AI technologies. Additionally, when we think of ESG, we want to know so much more now than we wanted to know before. We know as an individual that data is available. AI is going to get that data to us so that the whole point is to make that better informed decision. The other half of your question, where is AI not working? I don't necessarily see a negative, and I have not experienced it to the extent that it would be relevant. But oftentimes, we think of AI as this most positive, wonderful thing that's bringing all this information to us. And the big challenge that most people have is now I have all this information, I don't know how to understand what it's telling me. I don't know how to take that data and create an actionable result. I don't know how to take all that data and put it in a centralized, going back to the centralized view, so that I can understand what it is. So at the moment, the only real negative I'm seeing, and again, AI is using as an augment or supplementing our human brain, is that we're back to information overload again.
Yeah, hard problem, hard problem. I think I can go a couple more, then we're done. We have a lot here, so unfortunately,
I'll be short, my answers.
I won't be able to go through every single one, but yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for participating. I like this one. I would just jump in. Melissa, what soft skills should procurement professionals develop to keep relevant in this new architecture journey?
Critical thinking, creativity. I'm going to say design thinking. Design thinking, if you haven't heard the term, is not looking at something as it was and trying to modify it. It's stepping back and creating something new. That's going to be critical to how we move forward. Going back to Zoox, a company that's creating a human. Zoox, Z-O-O-X, is creating the first bi-directional taxi. True autonomy, no human interaction, currently being tested in San Francisco with some bumpy starts. They designed it from the ground up and created a beautiful product. Whereas if you look at other companies who are trying to do the same thing, they're taking what was already built, keeping the chassis, keeping the foundation, and just trying to stuff automation on top of it with no success.
I got a most voted one here again. Can you refer to us any book, material, articles, or something interesting on this matter of this hybrid architecture? Where could we follow more content and learn more about this? Can you help us here?
There's not a lot of books on the hybrid architecture. There's a lot of books on how AI is embedded in our culture. There's one book called, I don't know if you can see it, it's this one. Yep, this one here. This is the one I'm reading right now. It was recommended by Seth Dobrin. He's the former global AI officer for IBM. So usually when he recommends a book to me, I kind of read it. But it's how AI can potentially be good or bad when it comes to reducing bias, and how sometimes
Can
AI...
you show the name again, because the blur, yeah, there, hidden in white side, Kelvin D. Lawrence, perfect, thanks.
Yep, so I just started it, but the purpose is how AI was meant to be this huge social equalizer to promote fairness and remove human bias from the equation. But this book explores if that's still a myth. So that's why I found this book pretty interesting.
So, Melissa, we're getting on our time here. First, I would like to really thank you for talking a little bit with us, sharing your vast knowledge about the technology and the procurement technology landscape. It was really great, and I also thank the audience here for having so many questions. Sorry that I wasn't able to put all of them, but we have to keep us on schedule. So I would like to thanks again. Give a round of applause to Melissa, guys. I think she deserves it.
For some of your questions, Leo, I've got a slide that talks about just one slide that I can share around the five
just
pillars
jump
of
in.
trust. And I've got another slide on, there was a question around ESG, and I've got another slide I can share with you on what are some of the skills that we need for the future. I'll package that up with this presentation and send that over to you, Leo, tonight.
Perfect. That's a nice farewell gift. I like it.
Great.
So thanks again, Melissa, and I hope to see you again sometime in Brazil, maybe, for the coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you own us. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.